Good afternoon from Hopalong Hollow. This is Jerry, and I wanted to start out before I begin this video on an American cottage garden by showing you an art piece that's actually inspired by our American cottage gardens. And this was a piece of artwork that I did in 2011. It is a painted paper cutting. This is the original piece, and painted paper cutting, if you haven't already known much about it, is also called Scherenschnitte, which is German for scissor snipping. The process is that I make a drawing on parchment paper, I cut it out into a silhouette, one piece of paper, and that remaining silhouette is what I paint with watercolor. So this is actually a piece of Scherenschnitte, or paper cutting, folk art. What I'm giving away in my giveaway that I announced last week is a print of this piece. Not this original, but a 16 by 20 offset lithograph, signed and numbered. This piece I created for gardeners. With loving hands a garden is made, diligent labor with sickle and spade. From rich black earth there comes rebirth, as spring doth come to call. And the little etching in the middle was inspired by my collection of antique farmers' almanacs from the 1800s. This piece is dedicated to all who toil in the soil, and it's called "To Everything There Is a Season." So in appreciation of my subscribers that are so kind to actually visit my videos when there are thousands of channels, and I realize that, I'm very, very thankful to you and grateful that you do visit mine. This piece has everything the gardener loves, from birds and vines and vegetables and fruit and honeybees and garden books and pears and baskets. Anyway, it's a gardener's piece. So at the end of the video, I will tell you how you can get a chance to win an offset, signed and numbered lithograph of "To Everything There Is a Season." Now let's get into the cottage garden. This little corner is a perfect example of a tiny cottage garden. It's actually a corner in the potager, but if you have a little corner in your yard that you want to fill with beauty and color, everything here was planted from seed back in, I believe it was January or February. It was in the winter. Today we're going to talk about cottage gardens. You hear the term cottage garden a lot these days. So what exactly does it mean? What exactly is a cottage garden? Generally, when you think of a cottage garden, you think of England, and you think of an English cottage garden, which is really the epitome of cottage gardens, and that is in fact where cottage gardens originated. The word cottage actually comes from the word Catar. It's Middle English, and a Catar was a peasant. A peasant who, in return for working the land for the lord of the manor, was granted a small house and a small plot of land on which he and his family could raise a small garden, a pig, maybe an orchard, maybe a coppice for willow, on which they could make fences, wattle fences and such. And eventually add a few flowers to bring into the house. We have a busy garden this morning. We have a very busy cottage garden this morning. Listen to those little hummers. So essentially, in the 16th and 17th centuries, the cottage garden was really the realm of the peasant. It was a garden of practicality. It wasn't until later, when these rural, charming cottages were discovered, to have a certain lovely innocence about them. So in essence, the original cottage gardens were really family kitchen gardens, full of the necessities that would get you through the year. But eventually, when you're planting things like chamomile, and chamomile have those beautiful little flowers, or catmint with the beautiful purple flowers, or sage, then you start to get the color in the garden, and you start to see the beauty of the garden. And flowers begin to creep in. And before you know it, you actually have an ornamental garden, as well as a practical garden. In the 1500s, one of the first publications came out instructing the cottager on the proper way to do their garden. And the garden became the domain and the responsibility of the housewife, as exhibited in this lovely little rhyme that goes like this. In March and in April, from morning to night, in sowing and setting, good housewives delight to have in a garden or other like plot, to trim up their home and to sweeten the pot. Well, as you can well imagine, a busy farmer, a busy farm wife, didn't have time to be fussy. In particular, about the placement of plants, the perfection of the garden bed, and therefore the gardens just grew in a wonderful, harmonious confusion. Early as the 1600s, there were pamphlets and couplets being printed to advise the farm wife what kind of seeds, herbs, flowers, and bees she should be adding to her garden. So how did today's cottage garden evolve from the farm wife's practical and necessary kitchen garden from the 16th and 17th centuries? That's the question. Very much like today, people want to simplify their lives, and they want to go back to their roots, and they want to go back to the country life. And really, that actually did happen in England in the late 1800s, and actually as early as the 1700s, because they saw the rural, idyllic, so seemingly idyllic life of the cottage farm to be a nice relief from the formal French gardens or the Victorian gardens that they were basically faced with, which required a lot of work and a lot of effort, and generally a gardener. But cottage gardens can be done by one person without a lot of effort. In fact, in a periodical of the time called Cottage Gardening, yes, they had periodicals that early about cottage gardening because so many people were interested in the style. One of the pieces of advice was, quote, "We should say that a very good rule is that a cottage garden should be one all the labor in which is done by the occupier." So here in this new cottage garden, I wanted to show you an example of all the different varieties and manner of plantings that you can actually include in this style of gardening. Now, this is a new garden, basically. It is on a slope. I think I showed it in a previous video from a different angle. But here you see flax. And down here we have little forget-me-nots beginning to open. Tiny poppies. Such pretty little delicate poppies. Seems like everything right now is looking blue, purple, and white. But up there we've got sunflowers. So in this little section alone are just a huge variety of different plants. I've even got clover in here that I purposely put in. Red clover. I think that'll offset some of that blue. Now, in a cottage garden, there's rarely any earth to be seen. And the only reason there is in this space, I've got some weeds to pull here too. The only reason is because it is a new garden and it just hasn't filled in yet. But the beauty of cottage gardens is that they fill in basically all on their own because many of the plants are going to drop seed. This phlox, these poppies, the sunflowers, and the forget-me-nots, every one of these will drop seed for me. Here we have some larger poppies and larkspur. And the beautiful hollyhocks. We've only got one opened. Hollyhocks actually were brought back from the Holy Land by the Crusaders. Uh-oh, got some stink bugs on there. And they were very similar to British hawk and mallow plants, hence the name hollyhock. And here we call it hollyhocks. I guess these are about, some of them 6, 7 foot tall, an absolute cottage flower, as well as larkspur. Down here we have zinnias, which I pretty much consider an American cottage flower. And these zinnias came from seed that was dropped in the ones I put in last year from seed when I started this garden. These were all volunteers because zinnia is an annual. It is not a perennial. And up there you can see those fantastic poppy heads that will also drop literally thousands and thousands of seeds, as well as the foxglove, which is spent, but the numerous little seed pods on those stalks are just going to provide me with foxgloves for years and years and years and years. This garden next year will be absolutely full of them. So there's our American cottage, and this is our American cottage garden. 1 of 7, because that's all I grow. You may look at this garden and say, well, it doesn't seem to have any rhyme nor reason nor plan. It's not tidy. Well, it isn't tidy. It's more like a tidy mess. That's what this is. A cottage garden is a tidy mess. The way it's tidy is that you want to keep the weeds out. You absolutely don't want the weeds in your cottage garden. And so you do try to keep it weeded. But usually in a cottage garden there are no empty spaces because they're filled in naturally by the flowers themselves. They either spread, they reseed, the roots go underground, and they just take over the garden. And that's the beauty of the cottage garden. And that's what gives it its wild, natural look. The cottage garden does look unplanned. Initially, there is a plan. Of course, there's got to be a plan. You're starting with an empty plot of land. This was a plan right here. This plan is spiderwort because I had so much of it, I decided to make it into a hedge. So, never having seen a spiderwort hedge before, I gave this one a try, and I love it. It's not formal in the least bit. It couldn't possibly be because of the nature of this plant, which is really a rather wild-looking creature. But it made a great hedge. another thing. You're planting your plants in groupings of 3 or 4, but that's so that when they do finally come into their own, you actually can see them as a grouping, although they may get lost in the crowd. For example, here is a ground rose that was planted a few years back, and it was just very small, but now it's covering about 9 feet in this garden. It goes under the plants, it goes over the plants. They all blend in here together so beautifully. So you've got perennials, you've got roses, you've got annuals. You've got biennials such as foxgloves and Canterbury bells. And we'll go look at a couple of those plants here in a little while that bloomed earlier this month. So what have we got in this garden? We're just going to walk around and see what sort of cottage flowers we've got here. Rudbeckia. The Rudbeckia, otherwise known as the Black-Eyed Susan. Not open yet. Most of these are not open. They're June flowers. Lamb's ears. This is a Baptisia, which is a member of the pea family, which has beautiful pea-like flowers. We've got a lot of coneflowers in here. There'll be purple coneflowers. It's a little patch of cosmos. I expect a lot more than that. The larkspur is beginning to grow, and because this is a cutting garden, I really need to snap the tops off of those and put them in a vase so that this will get fuller and keep on blooming. And here we have some more Black-Eyed Susans of a different style, and back there we've got phlox and daylilies and rose of Sharon and climbing roses that will climb up that tree. Actually, they already did climb up that tree. I consider sedum very much an American cottage garden flower. We've got a lot of lupins planted from seed here. More phlox, more roses. The peonies have already bloomed. Beautiful peonies. This is why they needed a support. As you can see, they are just huge. So the variety of flowers that you can put in a cottage garden is just endless. Here we've got the foxglove going to seed. And your garden, in many cases, just rejuvenates itself every year with new plants from seed that's been dropped in the garden. And as I said before, it's the seeming absence of a plan that actually gives the garden its charm. But we know that in the beginning it was planned, the whole thing was planned, and then the plants just took over, and now they speak for themselves. So for me, a cottage garden is unashamedly exuberant, not the least bit bashful, sometimes crowding its neighbors. But in the long run, they all seem to get along quite well. Now, a cottage garden also may seem like a lot less work than a formal garden, and that would be true. But that doesn't mean you don't have to weed it, and you have to keep up on it. And when the flowers are spent, you want to cut them down. These daisies will bloom for about 3 weeks. Then they'll begin to reseed, which I really don't want them to right now because I've got so many already. I will cut them all the way down about to 5 inches off the ground. They'll start to grow again. They will rebloom in late summer. But in the meantime, they'll give other plants a chance to come up. That's the lovely thing about gardens is, you know, everything doesn't bloom at once. If it did, it'd be quite fantastic, and you could actually plan your colors that way. But that's just not the way it happens. It's just one act after another, and everybody has their own time on stage. And then it's time to move on and let the next flower make its performance. This is what the garden looks like right now in early June. I think it's actually it's the first day of June. And this is just Act 1. No, it's actually Act 2 because the foxglove's already bloomed. But when this garden really starts going is in mid-June, and this will turn into a sea of color and a lot of cutting flowers in here because this is also a cutting garden. So, I don't know if I've covered everything. Probably not. I just can't say enough about this gardening style. It's just the one I love. And it's obviously not for everyone. And if you love formal gardens, that's wonderful too. Because I think all gardens are beautiful. As long as they're kept up and somewhat weed-free. Although those weeds are inevitable. It's one thing you cannot get away with. Even if you have a no-dig garden, you're still going to get weeds. I'm sorry, but it's true. Just not as many. So let's get on with our drawing, and we will see who or what is required for you to win a garden print. In this video, I'm going to be doing a drawing next week for this offset lithograph, which is from a painted paper cutting that I did. It's really truly a gardener's piece. It's called To Everything There Is a Season. This is a print. It's a 16 by 20, which is a standard picture frame size. It will be sent to you with a backing and in a plastic sleeve, and it will be signed. So, if you live in the continental United States, unfortunately, that's the only place that I can ship this piece. Please, if you're interested in having your name put in the hat, mention that in your comment. And next week we'll have a drawing to see who is going to win this lovely piece. This is simply a thank you to subscribers for watching my channel. I know some of my videos can be pretty long, so I do appreciate the fact that you take the time to do that. And I know there are so many garden channels, so many places you could be going, so really, it's sincere thanks to you all over the place that watch these videos. Seriously, I thank you so much. And so this video is not over yet, because I have to show you this week's bouquet. And it will be a posy. How to make a posy that you can give away to someone you like. So stay tuned.